On today's Locked On Thunder podcast, we have a rising star joining us to talk about Thunder Media Day and training camp.
You are Locked On Thunder, your daily Oklahoma City Thunder podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Let's get it going on the Locked On Thunder podcast, on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host, media member, and beat writer for Thunder on SI, Rylan Stiles. Follow me on Twitter at Rylan_Stiles. Follow the show on Twitter at LOThunderPod. On today's show, we're joined by the superstar, the prolific Joel Lorenzi at JX Lorenzi on Twitter, the Oklahoman beat writer. Joel, 2 days in, how are you doing today?
I'm good. You flatter me too much, though.
Well, it's true. You're gonna be doing great things. You already do great things at the ripe young age of 20-something. Joel, it's going to be a fun season. I think that's already clear. But how are you feeling the first 2 days in? You personally, are you in midseason form yet? Are you still shaking some rust off?
No, I'd like to think I'm in mid-season form. I've heard my share of 0-0 and expectations get knocked to the side. I'm hearing things that I heard all last year. So if this is what training camp was like last year, then I'm in mid-season form already.
Speaking of, Joel, Media Day came and went. The first training camp practice came and went. Did you have any, initial impressions from Media Day starting out with Monday?
Nothing overwhelming. I would say nothing unexpected came out of Monday. Like I said, a lot of like deflecting and tossing away expectations, basically throwing it in our face that the Thunder just doesn't treat expectations like we do, which is pretty fair and to be expected. But I didn't think there was anything crazy. I thought it was interesting that as many times as it was brought up, oh, who's starting, like, because that actually matters now. I mean, usually people ask that. It's like a courteous question, like run of the mill. Now it kind of matters, and it was like it was real. It got awkward at times. So I do wonder how those conversations are being had, if they're being had at all, beyond kind of the insight that Presti gave us when they signed Hartenstein, just in terms of wanting to build or wanting to promise environments instead of promising roles. That was kind of the words he used. Beyond those isms and hippie like hippie real thinking of basketball, I don't know that these conversations are actually being had in the building. Maybe they're deciding to wait till after camp to be like, or maybe they've had it fixed in their mind from day one, which it's hard to tell with them. But I think that was what stood out to me more than anything, maybe on Monday.
Yeah, on Monday, everyone said the right things from a player standpoint. I mean, Hartenstein said he doesn't care if he starts or not, that he's just going to buy into whatever the coach lays out. Same messaging from Chet, which obviously for Chet, it's not necessarily if he'll be in the starting lineup. It's who's going to be with him in the starting lineup. And then Mark said it would ruin the integrity of training camp to discuss any roles. So we got a very Mark answer on that one. Training camp did start, but we didn't learn anything on that front because it was just the first day of training camp. And so I think that they're going to be able to keep kicking the can down the road, because tomorrow's only the second day, and then Thursday is only the third day, and they're going to keep their options open. First thing, has your mind changed at all on who you would predict if you had to nail the starting five on opening night? Has your mind shifted at all? Where are you at on who you think will start?
No, it hasn't changed, mostly because at least through one day, for what that's worth. It sounds like I know, like, especially Mark talks about, oh, we don't come into anything with expectations. These guys know who Alex Caruso is, the type of player he's become after 8 or so years in the league. These guys know who Isaiah Hartenstein, on his third or whatever contract, who he is, who he's proved himself to be after last year. And so maybe you don't have expectations for who he is on this team, but you have an expectation and standard that he has to meet based on who he was in the past. And so what it sounds like, in talking to Shea and talking to Caruso, especially Shea, these guys are who they're advertised to be. These guys are who they, who we thought they were. And so unless they were, completely different and in this setting, with a deeper group, they just weren't who we thought they were, then that would be when I would change my mind. But it doesn't sound anything like that. I mean, we're listening to Shea talk about, him being impressed by Hartenstein, the passer. Obviously talking about the benefits of him as a screener. That was yesterday. Now that's today, actually seeing it in action. He played with him in the scrimmages today on his team. And then Caruso, he's living up to his reputation as a pesky defender. Everybody knows what that looks like, especially Shea, who's had to deal with him at times over the past several years. So unless these guys were different than advertised, then I have no reason to believe my stance has changed, which I think that, they'll both start their share games. And Caruso, if I had to guess, is a default starter.
How often do you think that the Thunder will rotate their starting five? I would also say that Caruso is in the starting five, as I have said this whole time since these acquisitions went down. I don't think there's anything to change. Like you said, number one, these guys are playing up to their standard, but number two, we haven't been given a quote or an inkling of anything different. So there's no point to zag yet until we hear something different. But it does feel like inevitably this team, will have a more fluctuating starting five compared to last year, where if they were healthy, it was going to be Shea, Josh, Dort, J-Dub, Chet. How often would you see the Thunder shifting their starting five game to game when fully healthy?
More than last year, obviously health be damned, like you mentioned, but also I do think health is worth considering here. Like they've had pretty great health the past 2 seasons. To do that 3 seasons in a row is tough. I'm not going to predict bad health. That's crazy, but I imagine they'll have their share of obstacles. And so they'll be dealing with that. But aside from that, even if they did have a perfectly healthy season, it's like you said, they still got data to sample. I think, and we didn't really talk about this. I don't think the last time I was on and talked about Caruso and Hartenstein and the lineup thing, they're probably going to have nights where neither of them possibly starts. Maybe they try a different lineup. They want data with that. They want to see what those two look like inside of a second unit. There's just so much data, I think, for them to collect, and so little stakes almost with the way the rest of the West is looking now. I mean, I'm not going to count out the Timberwolves. I think they'll still win their share of games. But there feels like on paper and based on expectations, a gap between them and some of the West that, I mean, you have Dallas, of course, but I think there's room for them to really sample and get their share of data, maybe more than they anticipated. And I think regardless whether, the West is still a juggernaut, but it could have been, an all-time West. It might be an all-time West. And I think they were still going to go in and have their, plans of wanting to sample a bunch of different lineups. I don't think anything is going to change that. And so health, there's no variable that's going to keep Hartenstein from starting games, Caruso from starting games. I just don't think anything's going to change that.
So that brings up a good point of a year ago, you looked at this Thunder roster and J-Dub and Chet were constantly in the starting five. Josh Giddey started 218 straight games of his NBA career. And then Shea and Dort were the mainstays of, going through this whole rebuild. So with that being said, who do you look at right now? Because last year there's a lot of guys. I don't think it's that many guys this year. Who do you look at right now as guys that if they are healthy, they are for sure going to start? Because I think that Shea's the obvious answer. I think that Chet's the obvious answer, and J-Dub as well. Would it just stun you if Lou Dort didn't start? I think that he's in that grouping. But for you, who do you think is for sure if they are healthy, they are starting?
Dort not starting wouldn't stun me. But if it was for Caruso and not on a game by game basis and on a more permanent basis, I would consider what a lot of people would consider just in terms of Dort's value with some of those second units and what that changes. I imagine the Thunder are thinking about that too. So it could happen. I don't know if it'll happen on a permanent basis. So I don't know that I remove Dort from that group for those reasons. I think he's almost guaranteed to start for that reason. But also like I want to call these guys interchangeable, but they have different like nuance, like different parts of their games that they bring between Dort, Kaysen, Caruso, and they've been pretty vocal about that as a team. So I don't want to call them interchangeable. I do think they bring different values to that second unit, so that matters when we talk about this. Other than that, I don't think there's any guarantees. If I had to guarantee somebody out of the rest of the squad, I think Caruso maybe has my stamp, but what do I know?
Yeah, well, what do you know, Joel? But I think that when you look at this team, the reason I would go ahead and stamp the core four as like these four guys are going to start every game, Chet, Shea, and J-Dub and Dort. The first three, Shea, J-Dub, and Chet, they have no debate. Like there's no one's going to push back on that. People could push back on Dort because in theory, if you just looked at Dort versus Caruso as basketball players, there is going to be a pocket of people who really think Caruso is better. But the point you brought up is the secondary unit. Of those two guys, let's say that the starting five is made and the decision is Dort or Caruso, which we both think they'll play together and they'll both be in the starting five. But if the decision is Dort or Caruso can really help your secondary group. Lou Dort cannot. I mean, Lou Dort improved his efficiency last year by cutting out bad shots, and part of him cutting out bad shots was the shots were not available to him to do something silly on the court because he was so lower on the totem pole. In that secondary unit, you are lacking some playmaking, you're lacking some offense, and in those environments, whenever the team is lacking those components, Lou Dort we know is not afraid of the moment, and in fact, he'll try to press and he'll try to fill those gaps. And that's not an area where you want Lou playing, in my opinion. You'd rather have Caruso in that area. So I would stamp Dort as if he's healthy, he's starting just because of what it wrinkles out for the rest of the team. But it is a very interesting topic. Of course, there's no debates. And then we can quabble on Dort, but that's why I give him if he doesn't start, I would be pretty stunned because of what it means for everybody else.
No, I agree. And as I think about it, it just seems I don't know if the team wants to be so predictable, even though like the starting lineup of the guarantees and Shea and Dub and Chet plus Dort plus Caruso. I mean, you would think as a casual basketball viewer, you would see that they swapped Giddey for Caruso and be like, well, this has to have a net rating of 20,000. This lineup after how well they did last year. I just don't. Now that I think about it, I don't know if the Thunder wants to be so predictable all the time, and so that's why I think they'll mix it up. I mean, it feels obvious because you know who they are as mad scientists. I just don't know on what type of rotation we're looking at, but it does feel like at a certain point people are gonna scheme for that, even though it feels like an impossible lineup to scheme for. I mean, it feels like there's very little caveats to come with that lineup. Obviously, you're small, traditionally or on paper, which doesn't matter really for that lineup. But I just think there's too much data to sample, which feels crazy because this team just won 57 games. And now that was last year's team. I mean, this is not the same team. So it's just too much to think about.
It's a lot to think about. And we both will again predict Shea, Caruso, Dort, Dub, Chet as a starting five. That's your starting five conversation coming up. What do we see at practice today? But first, want to say right now about our good friends over at FanDuel. Check out FanDuel right now because it's awesome. NFL fans, this season can start with the bang for you as you return to FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So right now, you can go and if you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can place a live bet. If you know what you want to do heading into a game, you can place a bet there. No matter what you do, your first $5 bet, win or lose, is a guaranteed bonus bets of $200 at FanDuel. All you got to do is visit FanDuel.com and place a $5 bet. You're going to get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. If you're only into the NBA, well, not only can you bet on future bets like who's going to win the NBA Finals or like who's going to win the West, where the Thunder are the favorites to do so, you can already bet on NBA opening night and get an edge there. The Thunder, 2.5-point underdogs in Denver on opening night. Check it out today at FanDuel.com. We're back on the Locked On Thunder podcast, on the Locked On Podcast Network, your teams every day. On today's show, we're joined by Joel Lorenzi, the Oklahoman beat writer. And Joel, we're talking media day. We're talking first practice. Let's start with the practice here, and then we can circle back to media day as needed. Did anything from the small viewing portion that you got to see at practice or from how the players were talking, did any of that change or shape or shift your mindset?
Well, certainly not the viewing portion. I mean, you know what that is. That's basically free throw practice, which is fine. I mean,
and around the world, which I can beat you in 2K.
Anyway, I mean, it's basically free throw practice. Like you're watching guys get their last shots up. I mean, 2 minutes into you standing in the gym, it goes from being a complete madhouse with the regular staff, the G staff, scouts, the training camp guys, the entire roster, all flooded in this gym to 2 minutes later, you're seeing around the world on one basket, Shea on the other basket with his group of guys, and then a complete court, just the entire pool of people just vanishes. So there's nothing really to take away from that. I mean, Shea, his shot still looks good. He still looks automatic from mid-range.
He can still hit an elbow jumper, yeah. He can still do that.
He's methodical, yeah. But as far as their words, the questions were, what they should have been a lot about the newcomers, about early impressions, and the responses were super thundery, which should be, expected just in terms of Mark really emphasizing like, hey, today's day one of training camp. He said something, I don't know if I want to call it a bar or not, but he said something along the lines of like, a takeaway insinuates that you have data to go off of, and they don't. And so they're really just, it's kind of out of his hands. He's not over coaching, as he said, toward the end of his availability. He's letting things unfold. He's letting these guys get their excitement up. And then they'll act on some of the little wrinkles later on. I imagine these practices, they're not perfect practices. I mean, winter practices ever, but these practices are certainly rough around the edges. I mean, he said they're not as sharp as they want to be. But then again, I imagine they have a great standard for this team. It's a big thing trying to implement two guys like Caruso and Hartenstein, no matter how well they seemingly fit the puzzle. So I thought that the responses were to be expected, maybe along the lines of like to be unexpected. The most surprising thing was Caruso's reaction. The surprise was in his reaction, not ours, but him saying, he's getting hit by Hartenstein screens, and he's like, damn, like, you don't know how big that dude is. I think people, I think a lot of us can gauge that from afar, but for him to say that as a, all-world defender is kind of crazy.
Yeah, as an all-world defender who's not having his first trip around the NBA is pretty special, and I think that's been a constant theme of the first 2 days. I mean, J-Dub talked about it on Monday. Shea's talked about it both days. Caruso is Isaiah Hartenstein's screening ability. Whenever you look at Hartenstein, I think that's the most exciting element. People can talk about his floater. They can talk about his potential three-point shot, which we'll get to. But the screening ability and the advantages it creates for himself and for, more importantly, in one sense, Jalen Williams on the secondary unit trying to lead and engineer an offense, I think will be massive for this Thunder team, who, of course, saw J-Dub take over at times, and there was a whole fourth quarter dub narrative for the whole regular season, but also saw him labor at times offensively, partly because you didn't have a guy like Isaiah Hartenstein who can make life easier both with the pass and also with creating mismatches for Jalen Williams to take advantage of. So his screening and his physicality, I think, will be totally different for Oklahoma City.
Yeah, and Shea said it himself. Like last year, they were a team that slip screens a ton. They're counting on, if they're going guard to guard, they're counting on most teams not being able to communicate that well because they literally was so much. I mean, Isaiah go screen, or even Chet's not really setting screens. He's setting like rubs or stuff to get out of. You get your quick little contact and you confuse the defense, which works so well because they had constant shooters. They're young, they're quick. But sometimes you do need that traditional screener. I mean, we saw it in the playoffs how that could have altered Dub's game potentially. And for Shea to admit that, like, last year was a team they slip so many screens. This gives them a different look. I would say it's encouraging for listeners.
Yeah, it's very encouraging because now you can do both. I think that sometimes we get bogged down in Hartenstein conversation of like, now they can rebound, now they can play physical, but they can also still do the stuff that they did so well last year, playing small, playing with guard-to-guard screens. It just means that you can match and be versatile and have all these different elements and wrinkles to your game, which Mark talked about, and it's going to be a focal point of this season of you cannot win at the rate this Thunder team is expected to win, at the rate that this Thunder team wants to win, without being multiple, without being able to win in multiple different ways. And this team, I think, can do that. But Hartenstein, another aspect that's about his game that's being talked about is his jump shot and his three-point shot. Whenever you hear Shea talk at Media Day about how he still envisions Hartenstein evolving his game and he still thinks that Hartenstein has a jump shot that he hasn't gotten to show yet, where does that leave you with what to expect from Hartenstein's three-point shot this year?
It leads me to expect that they'll at least give him some freedom to pull those. I think if a defense is completely sagging him, obviously the easy thing would be to whistle for Isaiah Joe, get into a quick DHO and force the big to come up. But that's old news, man. Like I imagine some of those, they're just gonna be like, bro, let it fly. Because why not? Now I think I don't know how short the leash will be, because obviously there are better shots than that. They always work for the best shot, the most efficient shot, and there are plenty of efficient shots these guys could get up. I mean, we've been talking about it even over the past couple of days, which is to be expected. Just refining, taking that step from finding out what good shots are for a team, and now refining it to be like mastering what a good shot is for every individual based on who they are, what their strengths are. That's something that's been talked about. And so there are efficient shots out there. Isaiah Hartenstein threes are probably low on the list, but they'll at least want to see what's there. I imagine, Chip England magic is a thing. And so I imagine they're going to want to tap into that, see if some juice is there, because it just would add to the versatility. It's tantalizing for sure. But again, I mean, the leash could be short. So I wouldn't think too much of it, but I also wouldn't be surprised when you see him check up, one or two every few games.
So with Hartenstein, I've been very, kind of wet blankety about Hartenstein's three-point shooting. There's been people who have been over their skis of what it can add. I've come around more to the idea the last couple of days, because now you're starting to pick up a trend. We can sit here and say for 20 minutes that the Thunder didn't say anything. Well, you go back to July. The three-point shot was brought up by Presti, was brought up by Hartenstein like 5 times a piece, it felt like.
Yeah. Monday,
Shea brings it up as like that's what he thinks can add to his game. Then you think about this offense. Well, what do they do really well? They get shots for their big men really well. Jay Will shoots the ball a ton, gets shots set up for him a ton. Chet, we know what he does. The shots are going to be there. The opportunity is going to be there. And like you said, the encouragement's going to be there. I think he's going to shoot more, and we'll see if it actually goes in. We'll see what the results are. But I'm more so in on the three-point shot being a thing, whereas before I was cautiously like, I think this might be a summertime topic, and it might be a workout video topic, and then these guys can revert to their old ways once the season tips off. So I'm curious on how his three-point shot will progress and what that will look like. We got our first look at that in game on a Monday in San Antonio. But coming up, what to watch for this week as training camp continues, and what are you curious about for Joel Lorenzi? But first, want to say right now, but our good friends over at Gametime, folks, Gametime's awesome. I love the Gametime app because Gametime offers you the last-minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. In fact, right now, if you get somewhere lower, which you will not, but if you get a lower price somewhere else, Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. That's how confident they are that you will not find a lower ticket. I also love the view from your seat, where you can see exactly where your seat is. If you've never been to that arena before or that venue before you buy it, you can get a view from your seat, and they cover your tickets with insurance for flexibility purposes and to help you with customer service. So check it out today. And I love their all-in pricing, where that you see everything up front. You don't have surprise fees at checkout. It's great. Go there right now by downloading the Gametime app, creating your account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms and conditions apply. Again, create your account. Use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. We're back on the Locked On Thunder podcast, on the Locked On Podcast Network, your teams every day. Check out Locked On NBA for the national scope of basketball. On today's show, we're joined by Joel Lorenzi, Oklahoman beat writer. I'm Rylan Stiles, beat writer for Sports Illustrated Thunder. Joel, when you look at this week, what are you curious about as the week progresses for training camp? What are you still interested to learn?
Obviously they're going to – some of these results and teams are going to vary because they just want to see different things. And, they really have little bearing in camp. But I want to see the lineups they're putting Hartenstein in. I think today they were saying that he was on a team with – it sounded like Shea, Kaysen, maybe Alex Dukas. Shea said Duncan, which was confusing.
I think
he said Duncan. It was very confusing. I don't know what Duncan's on this team unless they got Tim Duncan as a practice player. But and then I don't remember the fifth, but an interesting group for sure. Just to think about, again, the screens Hartenstein's can be setting, how they're using him, at the elbow, how he's playing off of Shea, what Kaysen's role is in that lineup, because it sounds like there's a obviously they're not going to put Shea and Dub on the same team in training camp. That's a little much. But there's clearly a responsibility in that lineup, I think, for Kaysen to play make. So I'm just curious about some of the lineup configurations. We didn't ask Caruso who he played with. I know for a fact he played with Chet. But I'm just curious about the things they're trying and what they're trying to get out of camp.
It'll be fun to see what they're going to get out in camp. I know that he played with Wiggins too, because he said that in his answer him and Wiggins were the defenders. Yeah. So Wiggins and Chet, we've kind of narrowed the list down from there, plus take away who was on Shea's team. But whenever you look at this, training camp, I'm not sure that we're going to get answers because, like I mentioned, tomorrow we'll ask Mark and he'll just say it's day 2. And so I think that they're going to keep the stuff close to the vest. Yeah. Like we're not going to magically crack the code here on how to talk to Mark and usurp answers from him. One thing I'm just curious about, and I don't know when we'll find this out. You asked about Dillon Jones today. What position does Dillon Jones play? I mean, I asked him in media day if he's comfortable playing off the ball. He said he's very comfortable. He said he's more comfortable than he gets credit for. Like that was a point for him to talk about how comfortable he was playing away from the basketball. Obviously, he dominated the ball in college. I view him as more of a 4 in the NBA. But how do the Thunder view him as what they want from him? Because this is a guy who they've targeted 2 straight drafts and they traded 5 second-round picks for. So they clearly like him. They clearly have a vision. What is that vision? Yeah,
and I think it again is worth asking what lineups he's a part of. If he's on a team with like Dub, first of all, we already narrowed down. Well, maybe he was on the team with Caruso. I don't know. Maybe he's on the team with Caruso. If he's not, then you're thinking of, well, maybe Dub is heading the lineup that he's part of, and then maybe their big man is Jay Will, and then you go from there, and it's like, okay, maybe he is a 4 on the team. Maybe he can be a 4 and a secondary playmaker on that squad. It's worth asking these guys who they're playing with, trying to uncover that to get an idea of where the Thunder has them slotted. And it's more important for him because obviously that's the murkiest of we could talk role, we could talk minutes, we could talk fit in lineups, but we probably know the least about him just in terms of how they view him and where he fits in. I mean, obviously they get another one of those guys that they like in terms of a good size ball handler who can make heady decisions, but it's like you said, we know as little about him and the position he'll play at this level than anybody. Yeah,
and I think that all we know about Jones is that they love him. Like the Thunder love Dillon Jones. We don't know why or how or what. You can obviously we know he's a great prospect. Like we've all watched him play in summer league. We watched his college film and everything. Like he's a good player. But that player is truly unorthodox, and that's been the key word around Dillon Jones. this is a very unorthodox team, though. So, like, I mean, maybe they're the most equipped to handle it. I just look at Dillon Jones and think that, he's a lot like, I shouldn't say a lot, but he's somewhat like what happened with Cason Wallace last training camp of around this time, one day into camp, and 1 day into his tenure here, people kind of put him in a box of like, oh, he'll bounce back and forth with the Blue and the Thunder. And then throughout camp and throughout the preseason and throughout the start of the regular season, he became indispensable to where he never spent a day with the Blue, and he was playing 82 games, and he was just all in on the Thunder. I'm not saying that that's the same course and charted course for Dillon Jones, but how much will he play with the Thunder versus the Blue? I tried to get that out of him. I tried to get that out of AJ Mitchell, and like literally from top to bottom, apparently nobody's discussed or even heard of the word roles yet, even if they're going to go down to the Blue. I mean, Alex Dukas talked about going to the Blue, but no offense to Alex Dukas, we kind of knew that. So I just think that it's going to be a constant push and pull of trying to get answers, and the answers that we might develop from this week and what to watch for this week will be talking about Jones, talking about some of these guys who won't be rocking the boat, but could still make an impact.
Yeah, and as far as the roles thing goes, and treating it like a curse word, such as our world in Thunderland. So
we will not be discussing roles moving forward. Obviously, we don't want to ruin the integrity of training camp. Joel, I'm so happy to be back in the swing of things, seeing you every single day, having you on the pod every week, and talking about basketball. What do you got cooking up here as we hurl ourselves into training camp in the preseason?
You always try to get me to reveal what I'm cooking, and it's not happening.
This guy hates promotion. He hates your clicks. Don't click his articles. How about that, Joel? No more clicks.
I just don't. I'm not going to explain my reasoning, but I don't have to explain myself to you. But
you don't have to.
I don't have to. But you know what? I'm going to speak to the fans here and say that I am cooking up something big. Hopefully, all the pieces come together. But I'm trying. I
know what that thing is, and I'm not going to spoil it. I'm not going to tell them.
I'm trying to get together a big profile for opening week.
Oh, it's a big one.
Let's just say that if everything goes right, then people will be, they'll have a good profile.
They'll love it. They'll love it.
Sure. If they like me, if they like my writing, that is.
Who doesn't, Joel? You are such an athlete. I mean, just very athletic with a pen and on the court. So hopefully we can see the athleticism of your game at the next media run in Oklahoma City. So until then, be good and be good to